As you settle into stillness, perhaps with the hush of night beginning to surround you, allow yourself to drift slowly and gently into another time, a world distant from your own, shaped by tides, carved by fjords, and lit by long northern twilight, the world of the Vikings. We often picture them with iron helmets, though. As you may know, the horned versions are a myth. Their stories are fierce, filled with sagas of raids and roaring seas. But underneath the battle cries, there was life. Quiet, rhythmic life. A world of daily routines, of quiet craftsmanship, of relationships, long winters, and flickering hearths. Tonight, we won't be charging into conquest or glory. Instead, imagine yourself walking slowly through a Norse village, the scent of peat smoke curling through the air, the crunch of gravel beneath simple leather shoes, children laughing somewhere in the distance. A woven blanket hugs your shoulders, and the sky above is vast silent, stars scattered like Norse runes. In this journey, we will gently explore what intimacy truly looked like for the Norse Pleno, just in the act itself, but in courtship, relationships, and social expectations. We'll also slip into the soft spaces of everyday life, from the lives of Viking women and gender fluidity to the quiet rhythms of agriculture, trade, belief, and mystery, always at a soothing pace, just enough to occupy your thoughts until they begin to drift. So lean back, close your eyes if you like, and let's begin not with battle but with breath, not with conquest, but with closeness. Imagine yourself by a softly crackling hearth inside a modest Viking longhouse. The walls are thick with timber, lined in places with furs. A woman stirs a pot of barley porridge over the fire, and beside her sits a man, calmly weaving a small fishing net. Outside, the wind brushes gently through the grass roofs, and somewhere across the settlement, the sound of a sheep bleating quietly fades into the wind. In this world, intimacy was not hidden away behind closed doors in quite the way it is in modern society. The concept of private space existed but was porous. A longhouse might be shared by extended family, farmhands, or guests, with minimal partitions between sleeping spaces. And so, closeness emotional and physical unfolded in full view of life itself. Marriages were often arranged, especially among wealthier families. A union might be decided based on land, alliances, or kinship ties. Yet it would be misleading to think these arrangements excluded affection or respect. Many sagastos gently flowing oral stories of Viking live speak of deep love blooming between spouses, often after the bond was made. Viking law was surprisingly explicit about marital expectations. A man and a woman were expected to fulfill their roles, and intimacy was a part of this. But there was also recognition of personal agency. Women could initiate divorce, a relatively simple process in which personal possessions were divided and the woman could return to her family, sometimes even keeping the dowry. And while passion was not broadcast in public, it was not repressed either. Sexuality was a matter-of-fact part of life, much like milking the goats or mending sails. In Norse poems, lovers were described with imagery of blooming trees and flowing rivers. There was a quiet reverence for the act, an understanding that it brought not only pleasure, but continuity both of family and of legacy. The Vikings held a surprisingly open view of pleasure and bodily experience. Norse poetry, particularly skaldic verse, sometimes contained subtle innuendos. These were often clever, humorous, and metaphorical. One might compare a woman's lips to honey, or refer to lovemaking as plundering the hall of joy, phrases that carried warmth without vulgarity. Gender roles were structured, yet more fluid than one might expect. Men were expected to be protectors, farmers, navigators. Women, too, held significant power. A woman could own land, inherit property, and manage a household in her husband's absence, sometimes for years at a time if he went on expedition. Their strength was not merely tolerated, it was celebrated. Affection might be expressed through small acts, a carved wooden pendant left near a sleeping mat, or shared cups of mead by firelight. In settlements, there were often community gatherings, where music, games, and food provided gentle opportunities for connection. Young men and women could speak, laugh, and if fortunate slip away for a quiet conversation behind the sheep pens, away from the watchful eyes of their elders. There were rules, of course. A man who seduced a married woman could be fined or, if the wronged husband demanded it, might meet a more severe fate. Yet love did find its way. Illicit liaisons, though frowned upon, were sometimes immortalized in verse. The sagas are sprinkled with quiet lines about forbidden love or longing glances exchanged across the hearth. The Norse also practiced trial marriages in some regions, wherein a couple would live together for a set period, often a year, to determine compatibility. If, at the end of the year, they wished to separate, they could do so without disgrace. It's a curious contrast to modern courtships, bearing both a seriousness and a softness that feels almost timeless. And then there were the elders. The wise women, sometimes referred to as volvashu, carried deep knowledge not only of herbs and healing, but of relationships and fertility. Young couples might consult them for blessings or guidance. These women, wrapped in cloaks dyed with woad and berries, whispered ancient knowledge beneath trees older than memory. As you picture this, perhaps still by that hearth, consider how different, and yet how familiar, these connections might have felt. A world lit by firelight and sincerity, where affection was folded into routine, where desire was neither shamed nor exalted, just part of the slow, enduring rhythm of Norse life. Let us gently follow the quiet footsteps of a young woman in a Norse village, perhaps no more than 16 winters old, preparing for marriage. Her name might be Sigrid, a common name among Viking women, strong and soft in its syllables. She stands in a clearing, surrounded by birch trees, brushing her long, honey-brown hair with fingers worn from wool work. The wind stirs the hem of her linen dress, and nearby, a mare shifts softly, tied to a post. Becoming a bride in Viking society was both a deeply personal and profoundly communal journey. While romantic love could blossom, marriage was first and foremost an alliance between families, farms, or even distant regions. But this alliance was not cold. It was regarded as the foundation of a household, a building block of Norse life. The process often began with negotiation. For Thursa brothers, in the absence of one, would meet to discuss terms. A bride price, called the munda, was given by the groom's family to the bride's kin. It wasn't a purchase, but a sign of seriousness and capacity. Alongside it came the dowry, the heimanfylgja, gifted by the bride's family: clothing, household goods, livestock, or even land. In many ways, this mutual exchange secured the woman's well-being. Sigrid might have known her husband to be only briefly before the agreement was sealed, or perhaps they'd spoken often during festivals, their hands brushing as they passed horn cups of mead. Regardless, the night before the wedding would be one of ritual. She'd be bathed, often in hot water perfumed with local herbs: wild thyme, juniper, maybe petals from a midsummer bloom. Her female relatives would gather to braid her hair, humming old songs, while telling stories of their own unions. The ceremony itself was simple and sacred, sometimes held in a longhouse, sometimes beside a standing stone or under the canopy of trees. The wedding brought together community and gods alike. Rings were exchanged not of gold, but often of iron or bone, and oaths were sworn before witnesses and deities, such as Freya and Thor, protectors of love and household. Afterward, the feast. Long wooden tables lined with roasted meats, pickled fish, barley bread, cheeses, and horn cups of ale and mead. Musicians played soft strings and rhythmic drums, while elders spoke blessings in low, careful tones. In the flickering torchlight, Sigrid and her new husband would share their first drink as a kupala ritual known as the bride cup. And then, with the moon high above and embers low, they would be gently led to their shared bed. This space, often part of the communal longhouse, might be screened with woven cloths or tucked into an alcove. There, among the scent of pine and wool, their life together would begin. But what did it mean truly to be a Viking wife? Sigrid would rise early each morning, often before the sun lifted over the fjords. She'd stoke the fire, prepare food, churn butter, spin wool. Her hands would become calloused with the honest labor of life-tending chickens, grinding grain, dyeing cloth with lichen and bark. Yet hers was not a life of submission. In her husband's absence, during raids or trade expeditions, she might oversee the entire household and estate. She could negotiate deals, settle disputes, even stand before the local assembly if needed. The term husfreyja was used to describe such women lady of the house, with real power in both hearth and hall. Children would come, if the gods allowed, and Sigrid would raise them not only to farm or cook, but to know the sagas and the runes, to carve and to pray. Education was oral, tender, and persistent. Between tasks, she might sing old stories, passing on history like thread from mother to child. Her marriage, too, would evolve. It might remain peaceful, with mutual respect and quiet laughter shared over steaming bowls of stew. Or it might grow distant, shaped by long absences and silent burdens. If cruelty came physical or emotional, she had recourse. Norse women could seek separation, and in many regions, their word carried legal weight. Some marriages ended, others endured. The sagas rarely spoke of fireworks, but often hinted at deep, enduring companionships. Partnerships where a woman knew her husband's silences as well as his speech, where shared work knit lives together like the woolen cloaks they wore. And what of old age? A Viking woman's value did not wane. An older bride, now a mother of mothers, became a centre of counsel. Her words were sought, her wisdom trusted. By the hearth, wrapped in layered wool, she would tell tales of gods and kin, her voice soft, her hands still steady. So picture Sigrid, now with greying hair, walking along the shoreline with her grandchild beside her. She gestures toward the sea, tells of the day her husband returned from the east with a carved comb from Byzantium. The waves lap at her feet, and her voice blends with the breeze, half memory, half lullaby. This was a Viking bride, not just a symbol or a contract, but a presence, a partner, a keeper of warmth in the cold north, a weaver not only of cloth, but of continuity, of community, of care. Now, let us leave the bustling village and walk quietly through the mists of time, into the quieter corners of Norse history where mystery lingers like dew on stone, and fragments of love, longing, and sacred union are left behind in objects, symbols, and rituals. These are not the grand tales of conquest, but the subtler evidence of a people deeply in tune with nature, spirit, and one another. In a museum in Sweden, under glass and careful light, there rests a small carving just a few inches tall. It's worn with age, its lines smoothed by time and earth. The figure is unmistakably human, and unmistakably explicit. Once unearthed from a grave mound, it likely held meaning far beyond the literal. Such artifacts' depictions of coupling, fertility, and masculine power have surfaced across the Viking world. They are not pornography as we define it today, but rather sacred objects tied to fertility, protection, and sometimes even humour. One figurine from Rellinga, Sweden commonly referred to as the Viking fertility god, features a seated male figure with exaggerated anatomy, carved with careful intention. He may represent Freya, the Norse god of prosperity, harvest, and most notably fertility. To the Norse, life and its continuation were divine matters. The body, far from shameful, was simply a vessel of power and continuity. Elsewhere, in Icelandic sagas and archaeological records, we encounter love charm small bits of bone, stone, or wood, sometimes etched with runes, buried beneath thresholds or worn against the skin. These were not crude spells, but deeply symbolic tools. A woman might craft a rune stave to ensure her lover's fidelity. A man might inscribe a charm to attract a partner. The language of affection was interwoven with the language of magic. Runes themselves, more than just an alphabet, carried weight and whisper. A certain combination of characters, the love runes, were said to bring about desire or passion when carved correctly and invoked with the right words. These symbols weren't cast about carelessly. They were etched with quiet purpose, perhaps in the glow of firelight, with an incantation spoken under breath, not to be heard by others. Burial sites also speak to these intimate dimensions of Viking life. In some female graves, archaeologists have found small boxes containing grooming tools, tweezers, combs, even ear spoons. These weren't merely practical items, they were symbols of self-care, of presentation, and possibly even of courtship. In a world without mirrors, a well-carved comb was as much a love token as a bouquet of wildflowers might be today. In certain male graves, especially those of warriors or chieftains, one might find amulets shaped like Mjolnir Thor's hammer. These could serve as symbols of strength, yes, but also as blessings for protection in both battle and bed. Thor was not only the god of thunder, but also a defender of marriage and sacred union. And then there are the ritual sites, woodland clearings, stone circles, and spring-fed groves where fertility rites may have taken place. While hard evidence is rare, poetic references and later folk traditions hint at communal rituals celebrating the cycles of growth and reproduction. During certain festivals, such as the welcoming of spring, couples might retreat into nature, giving thanks to Freyja and Freya in acts of symbolic union. Not all intimacy was physical. Emotional bonds were honored too, and sometimes tested by supernatural means. One tale, nestled deep within the Icelandic sagas, tells of a woman who, suspecting her husband of drifting affection, placed a small stone under his pillow etched with runes of truth. If he lied in his sleep, the stone would grow warm. A soft warning system born of folklore and quiet desperation. We also find hints of same-sex affection, though sparsely mentioned. In some poetic traditions, love between men was coded and metaphorical, couched in shared battle or travel. While Norse society was shaped by expectations of lineage and marriage, there is evidence of gender and sexuality being more fluid than once assumed. Some sagas tell of shield maidens who loved other women, or of men who crossed gender roles with divine blessing or personal conviction. In the world of the Vikings, the spiritual and sensual were not far apart. The very act of creating life, whether through love, art, or song, was seen as a mirror of the gods. The Norse creation myth itself begins with a union, fire and ice meeting in the void, creating life from elemental embrace. And so, as you imagine these artifacts silent, weathered, resting beneath layers of moss and time, consider what they truly are. Not just tools or trinkets, but echoes. Echoes of moments lived with intensity and intention. Echoes of a touch, a glance, a promise whispered under twilight. Echoes of lives not so different from your own, shaped by desire, belief, and the quiet hope of being remembered. Let us now step through the longhouse doorway and look not just at the hearth, but at the hierarchy that shaped who sat closest to the fire and who slept in the shadows. Viking society was not a flat world, despite the egalitarian threads we sometimes romanticize. It had clear distinctions between free and unfree, rich and poor, powerful and powerless. And like the grain stored in earthen jars, intimacy too was measured and sorted by these social lines. At the highest tier stood the jarls, the noble landowners, powerful chieftains, and regional kings. Their longhouses were grander, their ships longer, their cloaks dyed in richer colours. A jarl's marriage was rarely personal at first. Instead, it was strategy designed to unite families, lands, or rival claims. A daughter might be sent across the sea to wed a neighbouring chief's son. A son might be promised to a powerful widow, whose lands were as fertile as her family name. These were not cold unions, but practical ones, forged with solemn ritual and careful calculation. Yet even among the elite, affection bloomed. We know from saga literature that noblemen sometimes composed verses low and private praising the softness of a lover's hair or the warmth of a shared bed after battle. A wealthy woman, too, could be discerning. Her dowry gave her power, and her voice in household matters was expected, not exceptional. She might run multiple estates, and her hand in marriage could shift the fate of an entire region. Below the jarls were the carls, the free farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and tradespeople. Most of Norse society belonged to this group. Their lives were neither lavish nor desperate, and within their world, marriage often grew from familiarity rather than strategy. A smith's daughter might marry the tanner's son. A farmer might court the woman who tended sheep on the neighbouring hill. These unions were still subject to negotiation, but love had more room to breathe. The carls might host modest feast cakes of barley, salted fish, watered oleand, call their neighbours to witness a bond made not with gold, but with trust. Their longhouses were simple, often just a single shared space where animals and humans passed winter together. In these close quarters, affection and daily life were woven tightly together. A touch during milking, a whisper during sewing, each small act deepened the partnership. And then there were the thralls. Slaves, in Viking society, were not only labourers, they were also commodities, bought, sold, inherited. Their lives were controlled where they slept, what they ate, even whom they could love. Thralls could be captured during raids, born into servitude, or enslaved as punishment. Some served in fields or forges, others as personal attendants in the home. A thrall might be seen, always present in the background, stirring the stew, brushing the master's cloak, minding the livestock. And yet, even among the unfree, humanity persisted. There are accounts, fragmented and faint, that suggest thralls formed relationships, sometimes in secrecy, sometimes permitted by their owners. Two thralls might share a sleeping mat in a corner of the longhouse. They might carve initials into a wooden beam, or meet by the river in stolen moments of tenderness. These small acts, unguarded and ephemeral, were their own form of rebellion. To love while enslaved was to claim some part of life for oneself. At times, relationships crossed class lines. A jarl might take a thrall as a concubine, a relationship bound by power, not equality. These women could rise in status if they bore children, especially sons. There are tales of slave women who became respected mothers, even founders of noble lines. But the beginning of these stories was rarely gentle. The balance of power was always tipped. However, the Norse world did allow for movements low and rare, but possible. A thrall could be freed by their owner, or purchase freedom through long service. Once freed, they became Leisinger freedmen and freed women. They could marry, own property, and participate in society, though often with restrictions. Imagine, if you will, a freed woman named Asa. Once a house slave, she now runs her own stall in the village market, selling woolen cloaks and combs carved from bone. A man approaches an old acquaintance, perhaps once her master's cousin. Their eyes meet. There's history in the glance, but also something new. Trust, perhaps, or curiosity. In a world where status shaped every word, this moment is both radical and quiet. And then there are the stories told in Whispersoft, a young jarl falling in love with a woman he was meant to command, of two thralls fleeing together into the hills to build a life beyond chains, of marriages made not by families, but by two people who simply chose each other. Whether these tales are history or hope, we may never fully know. But they linger, like worn stones beside an old path marking places where love walked, even when it wasn't supposed to. And so, as you lie here, letting your thoughts ebb and drift, consider the many layers of Viking love, not only in firelit halls, but also in fields, stables, and storm-swept barns. It was shaped by law and softened by glances. It was carved into runes, wrapped in power, and sometimes lived quietly in the shadows. Imagine now a cold morning in late autumn. Frost clings to the edge of a thatched roof, and a low mist drapes the sleeping earth. Inside the longhouse, a low fire crackles as the first coals of the day are stirred. There is no rush, no loud call to begin the day, just the soft murmur of movement. And in that stillness, two people, husband and wife, perhaps rise side by side, wrapped in the scent of wool and smoke, bound not by ceremony, but by the rhythm of shared life. While Viking love is often explored through saga and lore, conquest and ritual, much of it was lived quietly in the folds of daily labour, the soft repetition of care. There is a gentleness here, in these unrecorded moments, where affection is not declared but demonstrated. Consider the act of making bread, the kneading of barley flour, the tending of the coals, the shaping of loaves. A wife prepares the dough, her hands strong and steady from years of practice. A husband reaches to stoke the embers, carefully adjusting the flat stone where the bread will bake. They don't speak much, perhaps a word here, a glance there, but they move in tandem, each aware of the other's rhythm. This is a form of love, too. In Norse society, many tasks were shared. Though certain duties were gendered, men ploughed fields or fished at sea, women wove textiles and managed the household. These roles often overlapped. If a man returned early from a voyage, he might mend garments or help grind grain. If a woman's hands were full tending a sick child, her husband might feed the goats or chop the wood. The home was a living partnership, not a rigid performance. Evening offered another quiet intimacy, with the animals fed, the children dozing, and the fire burning low. Couples might sit close together, weaving or carving or simply watching the flames. In the hush of winter nights, when snow piled high outside and silence stretched long, there was comfort in proximity. Sometimes they spoke about dreams, about past seasons, about the gods. Other times they said nothing at all, their silence filled with understanding. Love was also expressed through care during illness or hardship. If one fell ill, whether with fever or fatigue, the other would tend to them, prepare teas of wild herbs, or summon a healer from the edge of the forest. A woman might wash her husband's feet after days of travel. A man might cradle his wife's head as she laboured to bring new life into the world. These gestures were not grand, but they were enduring. Children, too, shaped the bond. Watching a partner teach a child to read the runes, to tie a net, or to recite the old stories could stir admiration and closeness. Parenthood was shared work, and love often grew in the shared watching of a child's small triumphs, sketching a fish, speaking a verse, walking alone through the snow for the first time. And there were gifts simple, personal, and often made by hand. A woven belt dyed with onion skin and ash, a carved spindle whorl polished smooth, a small pouch filled with salt or dried berries for a journey. These weren't lavish offerings, but thoughtful ones, stitched with time and care. The Vikings understood that a gift held more meaning when it carried a piece of the giver's labor. Even conflict, when handled with patience, could deepen a connection. Disagreements were inevitable over land, livestock, family decisions. But the sagas tell of couples who debated fiercely, only to find reconciliation through mutual respect. In a world where survival often depended on cooperation, harmony was not just desirable, it was necessary. In some homes, affection was spoken in prayer. A husband might invoke the gods to protect his wife before a voyage. A wife might whisper Freya's name while weaving, asking for fertility or strength. These private rituals, woven into everyday acts, connected love to something larger, a divine cycle, a sacred rhythm. There were also seasons. Just as the earth turned from snow to thaw, from bloom to harvest, so too did relationships evolve. Young couples, once unsure, grew steady through years of shared effort. Middle-aged partners found renewed appreciation in quiet companionship. The elderly, now less able to labor, offered stories and warmth, their bond no longer defined by action but by presence. And so, when we think of Viking intimacy, we must look beyond the ceremonial bed or the carved charm. We must see it in the hands brushing while lifting a water pail, in the shared bowl of stew on a cold day, in the way one person waited quietly at the shore for another to return. These were the moments that built Loveno with loud declarations, but with steady repetition. 1,000 tiny gestures, lived and repeated, until love became not a feeling but a way of being. So picture them now, lying beside each other beneath woolen blankets as the fire fades, their day behind them, the wind soft beyond the walls, and their breath rising in rhythm. No words are needed. In this space, in this silence, is the deepest kind of love, the love that simply is. As we continue wandering gently through the folds of Viking history, let us step now into a space less often explored, a space of identity, of roles not defined solely by the sword or the spindle, but by something more complex, more personal. In the quiet corners of Norse culture, beyond the traditional binaries, we find stories softly preserved in sagas and language of lives lived outside conventional lines. Here, gender was not always fixed, desire was not always contained, and love was many-shaped. Viking society, like most others of its time, upheld clear roles for men and women, at least outwardly. Men were expected to be warriors, landowners, or traders. Women were keepers of the home, the land, and the lineage. But beneath these roles, the Norse worldview allowed for more subtle interpretations of self. Not every life fit the mold, and in some surprising ways, the culture made room. The sagas occasionally mention individuals whose identities did not conform. One such term, ergi, referred to behavior that transgressed expected gender norms. While often used pejoratively in legal and poetic contexts, particularly to accuse a man of being unmanly, its very existence signals awareness of gender fluidity. This term was complicated, blending ideas of power, submission, and social status. Yet it also hints at a spectrum of identity, where some individuals simply lived outside the norms. There are tales of Seither practitioners, magic users, often male, who took on roles traditionally seen as feminine. Seither was a powerful form of Norse sorcery, associated with prophecy, weaving fate, and spiritual manipulation. It was primarily practiced by women, but some men such as the god Odin himself embraced it. In doing so, they blurred the lines between masculine and feminine power. Odin, the All-Father, was both warrior and seer, wise and unbound by rigid gender roles. His use of Seither was controversial but not forbidden. It made him more complex, not less respected. There is also the story of Thor dressing as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer. This tale, often told with humor, features the thunder god donning a bridal gown and veil to deceive the giant Iriemister. Though clearly comedic in intent, The story nonetheless presents a powerful male deity, adopting female identity to achieve his goal, suggesting that, at least in myth, gender could be flexible when needed. Among humans, some women took up arms and lived as warriors' shield maidens, as they are called in the sagas. While historians still debate their numbers and roles, the tales endure. These women dressed as men, fought alongside them, and often refused traditional marriages. One such figure is Herva, who wore male clothing, carried weapons, and sought her father's cursed sword on a haunted island. Her story, both eerie and empowering, stands as a symbol of agency outside prescribed roles. Desire, too, was not confined to one path. While most Viking unions were heterosexual for the sake of lineage and inheritance, poetic and mythological sources suggest a broader understanding of love. In skaldic poetry crafted with care and coded language, one finds occasional verses that speak of longing between companions, fellow travelers, or comrades in arms. These expressions are rare and always cloaked in metaphor, but they exist. Sometimes two men are described with tenderness that exceeds friendship. Sometimes women are bound together not just by household, but by shared life. There are Icelandic sagas that tell of men accused of forming inappropriate attachments claims, often entangled with questions of honor and power. The laws surrounding such accusations were less about morality and more about social standing. A man might be insulted not for desire itself, but for the perception of weakness, of crossing social hierarchies. Yet even in legal codes, there are spaces where same-sex relationships appear hinted at, rather than shouted. And the absence of strong prohibitions in some regions may suggest a tolerance rooted not in approval, but in indifference. In the rugged Norse world, survival often outweighed surveillance. Language, too, offers clues. The Norse had multiple words for love and affectionast. Elska, unnandiich with nuances of emotion, not bound to gender. These were not passionate declarations, but kiet recognitions. I carry ast for you, one might say not in a flourish, but in a murmur, over shared tasks or beside a winter fire. In domestic settings, roles could blur further. A man unable to fight might become a healer. A woman skilled in trade might run the household's financial affairs. What mattered most was contribution, not conformity, and in this flexibility, intimacy could flourish between those who chose one another, not for duty, but for resonance. Imagine now a small home on the edge of a fjord. Two women live there, one weaves, the other fishes. They laugh in the mornings, prepare food in the evenings, and sleep side by side under the same fur cover each night. Their bond is not spoken of in legal scrolls or preserved in monument, but it is real. It endures. Or picture two men, returned from travel, seated beside a riverbank. They speak little, but their hands rest close. They have known battles, storms, and loosened now. In the hush of twilight, they have only each other. There is no need for words. In the end, Viking identity was shaped as much by place and need as by law and tradition. It was a world of harsh landscapes, resilient people, and practical adaptation. Within that world, there was space quiet and unassuming for lives that did not fit the mold. And where there is space, there is always the possibility of love. Let us now step softly into the final frontier of Viking life, the quiet passage beyond death. For the Norse, death was not an end but a transformation, a journey from the known into the mist-wrapped halls of myth and memory. And like life itself, this journey was often walked not alone, but with the echo of love still present softly woven into rites, symbols, and beliefs that carried the living into legend. Death in the Viking world was a natural companion. Harsh winters, sea voyages, childbirth, and battle all brought it close. And yet, the Norse did not speak of death in whispers. They prepared for it, they sang of it, and in doing so, they shaped an afterlife where love familial, romantic, spiritual, continued beyond the body. There was no single Norse afterlife. The dead might go to Valhalla, Odin's grand hall for warriors who died in battle, but not all were destined for that storied place. Many souls, especially those who lived quiet lives or passed peacefully, were thought to journey to Folkvanga, the field ruled by the goddess Freyja herself, a deity of love, fertility, and passion. It is said that Freyja chose half of those slain in war for her domain, where they would dwell in comfort and companionship. Others, still, might travel to Hel, a realm ruled by the goddess of the same name, Despite modern interpretations, hell was not a place of punishment. It was calm, quiet, and shadowed, a place of rest for souls whose lives had ended without violence or grandeur. It was not feared, but accepted. And in this stillness, it is easy to imagine loved ones reunited, gathered once again around a hearth of memory. Burial practices, too, reflected these hopes. The dead were sent into the next life with care and thought. A woman might be buried with her keys, symbols of her role as keeper of the home. A man with his tools, weapons, or trading scales. Couples were sometimes laid to rest together, side by side, wrapped in wool and surrounded by tokens of their life combs, bowls, rings, or carved amulets. In rare instances, a ship burial was performed, a body placed in a boat, surrounded by goods, and either buried in earth or set aflame upon the water. This was not merely a dramatic gesture, but a profound act of belief. The ship was both vessel and symbol, carrying the soul to the next world. And what better metaphor for love than a shared journey across the unknown? Some graves suggest shared affection that transcended societal norms. In one discovery near Birka, a woman was buried with weapons, suggesting she may have been a warrior. Nearby, a second grave contained another woman, wrapped in furs, adorned with beads. Some scholars speculate they may have lived and been buried as companions. Though we cannot know their story, the placement of their bodies speaks softly of closeness. Gravestones and runic markers also preserve glimpses of mourning, inscriptions written in simple, heartfelt language. One rune stone from Sweden reads, "He raised this stone in memory of his wife, his beloved." Another speaks of a brother, loyal in life, missed in death. These were not grand poetic verses, but everyday declarations of affection that endured beyond the breath. And then there were dreams. The Norse believed that the dead could return not as ghosts to frighten, but as spirits with messages. A wife might dream of her husband, lost at sea, smiling from the prow of his ship. A mother might sense her child's presence near the cradle, long after they were gone. These were not considered superstitions, but part of the natural cycle of connection. Love, once woven into the fabric of life, was not so easily unraveled. In some communities, stones were placed on the graves of lovers flat and round, sometimes inscribed, sometimes left bare. On certain nights, people might visit these places to speak aloud, to remember, or simply to sit in silence. It was said that if one listened carefully, the wind might carry the voices of those who had passed still whispering in the language of affection. The gods, too, reflected this theme. Baldur, the beautiful god of light, was mourned deeply by all beings when he died. His wife, Nanna, is said to have died of grief and was laid beside him on his funeral ship. Theirs is one of the few stories in Norse myth where love endures past death, not with vengeance or resurrection, but with quiet companionship, side by side in flame and water. Even the seasonal rhythms of the Norse year echoed this idea. The long winter was not feared, but prepared for. It was followed by spring, not as a miracle, but as a certainty. In this cycle, death and rebirth were part of the same breath. Just as crops would rise again from frozen fields, so too would love endure, in memory, in story, and in spirit. So imagine now a small burial mound, snow beginning to melt at its base, a carved stone leaning gently nearby. You can see the names barely legible, but they are there. Two people who once shared meals, laughter, burdens, and touch. They are gone now, but also not. Their story, like the sagas, is still told softly, slowly, like a lullaby in the dark. And now, as our journey draws toward its final shore, let us look gently backward and softly inward. We've wandered through longhouses and burial mounds, walked the frost-lined fields of memory, and peered through the firelit haze of Norse life, not through the lens of conquest, but of closeness. And in doing so, we begin to see a quiet truth, that the Vikings, often imagined as fierce and distant, also lived lives filled with tenderness, partnership, and quiet longing. What then remains? What lessons hum beneath the surface of their stories, still warm with breath, centuries later? Perhaps it begins with the understanding that love is not always loud. For the Vikings, affection was rarely shouted. It was whispered in the way a partner helped carry water, or how one waited beside the door as another returned from sea. In our modern world, so full of noise and performance, There is something grounding in this, a love built not on grand gestures, but on steady presence, on being there, day after day, through hardship, through seasons. We also find, in Viking love, an unusual balance, a recognition that strength and softness can exist side by side, that a warrior could be tender, that a wife could lead, that to build a home was as noble as to win a battle. Intimacy was not separate from the rhythms of life, it was interwoven. It helped weave the sails, tend the flocks, carry the future forward, and there was fluidity, a quiet acceptance that not every path of love fits a single mould. The sagas, though rooted in tradition, still left room for ambiguity for shield maidens, seers, same-sex affection, and spiritual connection. Even in a world of law and lineage, the heart sometimes made its own way. There is also the matter of time. The Norse did not rush. Their world moved with the pace of wind and snow, of planting and harvest. A relationship took time. Trust was earned not in moments, but in patterns across shared winters, over joint labours, through storms weathered together. In this, we might be reminded to slow down, to give our connections space to breathe, to grow not in haste, but in depth. And perhaps most strikingly, there was reverence. For the body, yes, but also for the bond, for the unseen thread that ran from one soul to another. Whether through arranged marriage or sudden affection, through shared dreams or quiet duty, love was treated as sacred. Even when it ended, it was not discarded. Divorce was permitted, but not made cruel. Parting could be done with dignity, and new beginnings allowed. We might carry this with us too. That love need not always last to be meaningful, that its value lies not just in longevity, but in sincerity in how it is lived, in how it is remembered. In the end, Viking love was not one thing. It was a tapestry, thick with stories, some stitched in gold, others in coarse flax, but each thread part of the whole. And even now, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of feet pacing a longhouse floor at dawn, the hush of breath beside a fire, the last words carved into a runestone smoothed by time. Perhaps tonight, as you drift into sleep, you carry a piece of that with you. Not the swords or sails, not the myths of fury or flame, but the gentler things, a shared glance, a soft promise, the knowing silence of someone beside you, needing no explanation at all. For in every age beneath, every sky love endures. And so, our journey returns to the present. You are no longer standing beside the fjord, nor lying beneath woolen furs in a longhouse lit by flickering flame. The winds of the north grow still, the fire has faded, and all that remains is the hush. You are here, safe, quiet, held in the comfort of now. Let the lessons of Viking love linger, if only as a hum beneath your breath. The world is slower than we think, softer than we fear, and even in distant times, in unfamiliar places, hearts beat in ways we still recognize. May your rest be deep, may your dreams be long, and may love, in all its forms, find you quietly, steadily, like snow falling on a sleeping field. Good night.